The Justice Department is making some strong accusations against former President Trump and his associates. In its latest filing, the department accuses people in Mr. Trump's orbit of impeding its work and making false statements. It says it has evidence, quote, that government records were likely concealed and removed from the storage room, that's a room at Mar-a-Lago, and, quote, that efforts were likely taken to obstruct the government's investigation, unquote. The DOJ's filing also includes photos of classified documents. Some are labeled top secret. That department says that it recovered these documents from President Trump's office. Also, the filing states that the FBI search of Mar-a-Lago produced more than 100 documents. That's more than twice the amount that Mr. Trump's lawyers handed over voluntarily. His legal team signed a letter stating that all the classified material had already been returned. The former president seems to have moved away from claiming that evidence was planted at Mar-a-Lago. Now he's stating that he knew where these documents were. In his words, the FBI took them out of cartons. Now, this filing was in response to President Trump's request for an independent review of these documents, and a federal judge will hold a hearing on that request tomorrow. Let's begin with some context on all of this from NBC Homeland Security correspondent Julia Ainsley. And Julia, with all of the legal filings, I wonder where this puts us now. These aren't formal charges, they're strong accusations, but where does this leave us?
Joshua, I've got some context, but I've also got some news for you, because Trump has just filed his rebuttal. His legal team is filing their response to what we saw from DOJ. This just came through as I was dialing in to talk to you. I'm reading it through in real time. If I could break it down for you, what I've read so far, I'd love to. So remember, we saw from last night the Justice Department saying that they do not think there's a need for a special master. In fact, they think that that would impede the investigation, slow it down, and could be damaging to national security because they found such highly sensitive documents. They also found and believe that there might be some evidence for obstruction, and that was one of the reasons why they went in, because they believe that some of these documents might be moved on purpose in order to conceal the evidence. Now we're hearing from Trump's justice team, Trump's legal team. This is 19 pages. So far what I'm seeing is a lot of doubting that the review team, that would be the team appointed by the FBI, was in the position to determine what needed to be handed back to the former president, what might be his. And as usual, we're finding a lot of the details just here in the footnotes. In fact, here they're saying the move-in, meaning in this case the former president and his legal team, submits that any records containing highly personal information should be segregated from the seized materials and returned. They're making the argument that a lot of what was swept up in this search would have been highly personal for the former president and should not be handed over, trying to make the argument that perhaps this is some way to try to embarrass him or take things that are really his. But as we've heard from the Justice Department, they believe that is actually a very small number of documents that would actually belong to the former president, and that they've made those determinations already and returned to him what they think should be returned. But they say that President Trump's personal records are not presidential records, meaning they don't fall under the Presidential Records Act, and so therefore the FBI doesn't have the authority to keep them. But I have to point out here that in the filing we got last night from the Justice Department, they said that this is not just a matter of following the Presidential Records Act, that they believe other laws were violated here. Potentially the Espionage Act, which would keep the former president from bringing on and bringing to Mar-a-Lago some of that really sensitive information that would have been mishandled. And also, they believe that there could have been an obstruction charge. So still digging through this right now, but at the core of it, it seems that Trump's legal team is trying to say that regardless of the lengthy rebuttal from the Justice Department, they want Judge Cannon to still move forward with appointing a special master as a third party to review the documents seized in the Mar-a-Lago search. And the reason for doing that is that they don't think that the FBI and the Justice Department legal team can be trusted to know what might be the property and the privilege of Trump versus what should go to the government. That's where we are now.
Julia, I'm going to give you a second to flip through this document a little more. I was flipping through it while you were speaking. Sorry for not paying as copious attention to you as I should, but I'm interested in this too. So I do want to point out a few things that are early in the document. Let me give you a second to flip through it. Some of the things that stand out early on, and I'm just kind of, again, looking at this as Julia is looking at it as well. She is far more expert on it than me. But the very first page refers to an unprecedented, and I'm quoting from the document, a, quote, unprecedented, unnecessary, and legally unsupported raid on the home of a president and possibly a candidate against the current chief executive in 2024, unquote. That would lean towards some of the allegations against the Department of Justice that there is a political motivation behind this, which I think it's safe to say is part of the reason for the very unusual transparency that the Department of Justice has shown up to now. If you've watched our show for over the last few weeks, you know DOJ doesn't do this. The transparency comes when they file actual honest-to-God charges. We don't have charges yet. We may never have charges. This is still in the investigatory phase, and what we're looking at now is very unusual in the context of federal courts, particularly because there's no precedent for this happening with a former president. Then further down on page 3, and Julia, maybe you can help me with this sentence. This is the end of kind of the introduction to this document before it starts to go point by point. At the end of page 3, and I'm quoting now, this is the motion from the former president's legal team, quote, despite the clear desperation of the government in avoiding the broad parameters of the PRA, that's the Presidential Records Act, in allowing President Trump to possess documents, Movement, that's Donald Trump himself, declines the invitation to take on all potential future litigation in the narrow context of the court's ordered response regarding the appointment of a special master, unquote. Julia Ainsley, can you help me with that piece of this? Clearly, he is taking on the Justice Department in terms of the way that it's tried to get, it's tried to get documents through the Presidential Records Act, which is the issue here, right? That the documents, according to federal investigators, were not fully turned over to the National Archives at the end of his term. But it doesn't sound like he's backing off from requesting a special master, unless I'm reading this wrong. Can you help me with that?
Yeah, I don't think they're backing off of that request. In fact, when they keep going on point by point, they try to hammer home the fact that an independent third party is what's necessary here. I think, and look, we're doing this in real time here, but if I'm going to just weigh in on what I think they're saying here is that they're saying that Trump does not want to get involved in litigation just on the point of regarding a special master. So perhaps that means that if the judge decides not to appoint a special master, they'll move on and that they're not going to continue litigation on that point. But clearly, he's going to keep fighting whatever comes out of the Mar-a-Lago case. And they really, I mean, it's turned into a knife fight here, as you can see from what was filed last night and what was filed tonight. They also even just attack the very breadth of what we saw from the Justice Department, saying that the government is twisting the framework of responding to a motion, meaning their motion, Trump's motion for a special master, into an all-encompassing challenge to any judicial consideration presently or in the future of any aspect of its unprecedented behavior in this investigation. They're basically trying to say, look, Judge, the Justice Department is trying to curb your own ability to appoint a special master, and instead they've given us the whole book trying to explain what they're doing here, but really you should focus merely on the point that they aren't in the position to independently review this material. But you're right, that is a pretty complex and confusing sentence there about Trump declining the invitation to take on potential future litigation as it regards to the special master.
I do want to note that it does, on page 14, say that there are some conditions that were proposed by the government that apparently the former president is amenable to. It says he agrees that the court should direct the parties to submit a joint list of proposed candidates for a special master in the next few weeks, and that they should be required to submit an affidavit concerning any potential reasons for disqualification. So they seem to agree on some of the terms for appointing this special master.
That's right.
I'm not going to force you to do this on the fly, Julie, because I know you want to read. I know you like to read through it a little further, but I just want to be clear in terms of where we are with this hearing that happens tomorrow. This is additional context for the hearing at which this matter, I presume, will be decided tomorrow, right?
Well, we're going to hear tomorrow. It's very likely that Judge Kanan could rule, or at least indicate how she'll rule from the bench. It's at 1 p.m. in the Southern District of Florida, 1 p.m. Eastern time. We're going to see her hear from both sides in a court hearing. She doesn't have to decide there, but she already gave inclination last week to show that she would, in fact, grant the request for the special master. But if you'll just indulge me for a second to kind of do this on the fly a little bit more, one thing I did see is that they also are agreeing that it would be appropriate to set deadlines for the special master's review and shorten the time to appeal the special master's decisions. I think that's really interesting because they could still appeal the special master's decisions, but they're at least agreeing to a timeline, because one of the government's arguments is that this would delay the time. That could be something that Judge Kanan will lean on if she decides to grant a special master in this case, by saying, look, this isn't going to delay because they've agreed, we'll set a timeline together here. But the government's still arguing that this is unnecessary and could impede the investigation. But at this point, Joshua, both sides are just digging their heels in. Trump's team definitely wants to appoint it. The Justice Department doesn't want to. And tomorrow should be really interesting in that courtroom.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.